Well, the theme that Solomon is obviously developing right here early in chapter 10 is the idea that laziness is something that has to kind of be bred out of us. And I don't know that I completely understand it, other than the fact that the less energy I have to put into things, the more I find it easy to do those things. One of the things where I was going through physical therapy because of a injury in my back, the therapist told me something really interesting. He said, we tend to lean over and grab things from our waist using our back because it's more intuitive and it seems easier. But learning how to, lower your knees and go down, which takes more energy, is also one of the things that, bending the knees saves the back. And it's one of those kind of things you have to start learning those things, because eventually, especially as you get older, you find it becomes easier and easier to injure the back because the back wears out with work and time. And so it's learning how to do work in a way that's uncomfortable and not common and maybe even more difficult initially, but it will save you great pain and disability even later on in life. And that's kind of where Solomon is coming when he says in chapter 10, verses 4 and 5, he says, lazy hands make a man poor. And then the second part of that, he says, he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. I'm reminded of an account, I don't know whether it's truly an account or not, but where Abraham Lincoln was hired out to work in his neighbor's farm, and the neighbor found him sitting under a tree just reading a book, and the farmer came up to him and said, Lincoln, did your father never teach you how to work? And his response was, yes, but he never taught me how to enjoy it. That would be very, very clever. But the whole point was, it wasn't like Lincoln wasn't working because he was working his mind, but he understood, and it certainly proved right, that where his real future lay was in working his mind, developing, strengthening his mind. And so even though he had a small library, he read them copiously, including, and maybe most importantly, the scriptures themselves. And so the idea of putting forth effort is the idea that we do it in a way which will profit us down the road. And that's where I often think about, they say physical exercise profits for a little while. In our culture today, we have a lot of respect and envy, really, of a lot of great athletes. And these are usually people who have, from very early on, showed a special capacity. We might call it an athletic genius. And they have been able to use that to become really extra special, very good, gifted athletes. And some of them have made great careers out of it. But the whole point, I think, for many of these individuals, who are the smarter ones at least, they realize that their athletic season is rather short-lived. Football players maybe have 4 or 5 years. And if they don't think beyond that and make preparation beyond that, they're going to find themselves suddenly without the income stream they had. And oftentimes it leads them into criminal behavior. Not all the time, but sometimes. And it's really sad to watch that when you see somebody make shipwreck of their life and really waste the opportunity that they had. And I think that as we look at our lives, we have to think, okay, if God allows me, I'm going to be on here, this planet, what does the psalmist say, 70 years? And if I live out those 70 plus years, I'm not always going to be able to do the physical work, the lifting, the moving, the building, and all those kind of things. So am I thinking about how my life goes forward? And part of that means that we make preparation for retirement. We try to send resources in advance and let them work for us so that we don't have to break our backs when we are elderly. But also it means we develop skills and insights and abilities to do something more than just cut wood or stack blocks. We begin to realize that there's so much more to us than that. And therefore, I need to take that to another level and develop my capacities, my skills. Now, I know some people never get that opportunity, and I don't want to make you feel bad about that. But I just think that that's part of what it means for me, because when I was a young man, first in ministry, first saved, I worked every kind of job you can imagine. I worked in factories all over Southern California, doing everything from toilet factories to 50-gallon barrels, and all very, very different jobs, very different experiences. But they were things that I was doing to put food on the table, not to what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And one of the things I ran into was I was always being offered jobs by these different factories and different farmers that I worked for because I worked so hard and so energetic. I figured whatever I do, I'm going to do heartily for the Lord. I'm going to pour myself into it. I want to really make these people see Christ in me. But at the end of the day, they said, well, this is somebody we want to hire. But I realized that's not what God had called me to. So, a lot of times people go through school and pay their ways through school and they do it. But the job that they're, doing, like being a waiter or a waitress, is not what they want to do for the rest of their life. But they learn invaluable skills from doing those kind of jobs, from doing the menial labors. And it's not only you learn a work ethic, you learn that sweat is not a bad thing and that you keep in physical focus and shape, but also you begin to develop this network of relationships and interactions. You learn how to deal with people in different situations. I mean, these kind of things that we see as being the side trails of things we have to do to get by are part of the building blocks of who we are intellectually and who we are in terms of our character. And so God uses all these things in my life. And that's why it says, I think in the book of Zechariah, it says, don't despise the days of small things. Because every one of us is going to start, we got to learn, as Jesus said, learn to be faithful in the little things so that we might be faithful in the great things. I mean, look at it, for example, take King David. He started out as a teenager, maybe even 10, 12 years of age, taking care of the family sheep. The youngest in the family, least important, the end of the totem pole. I mean, that all the good and bad things flowed downstream, so the good things became diminished by the time they reached him, and the bad things were in full flush when they got to him. I mean, he had to live and learn how to negotiate, to deal with those kind of dynamics, that life is unfair and sometimes there's hardship and there are real dangers. Caring for a flock of sheep is not the most emotionally and intellectually satisfying thing. And yet David found ways to learn the scriptures, to learn the ways of sheep, not just keeping them, alive or fed. They learned the ways of sheep and saw the parallels between sheep and people. He learned how to be a leader. He learned how to defend and protect. All these things that he would need later on when he became king were the things that he learned when he was leading sheep in the wilderness. And God has you in some wilderness early in your life, and he's using it to teach you how to become a leader in the future. Now, the lazy man, basically he's looking for idleness. And so I think about, again, this is one of those things that touched on again and again by Solomon. In chapter 19, he says, an idle person will suffer hunger, or the desire of the lazy man kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. And in Ecclesiastes 10, he said, because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hand, the house leaks. And so essentially, if we don't take care of things in a timely way, they get worse and worse and worse. And so a little problem becomes a bigger problem over time because we simply kept on putting it off and not wanting to deal with it. And that's why the contrast, he says in Proverbs 10 verses 4 and 5, he said, but diligent hands bring wealth, and he who gathers crops in summer is a wise son. You see, I found that people who are hard workers work hard at everything they do. They're hard workers and they work hard at everything they do. They work hard if it's digging a hole in their backyard, or they work hard whether or not they're adding up a column of numbers, or they work hard when they're writing a sermon. I would say that my parents taught me how to work hard when I was a kid, because if I wanted money, I needed to go out to the farms and work. And I realized that the harder I worked, the more money I got paid, because initially that's all I could get is piecework, picking tomatoes, picking peaches, picking things that were growing in the fields. And that was hard, hot, long work. But I learned that I got to move up to better jobs. Like I got a job for the irrigation district, shoveling mud out of concrete irrigation ditches at 110 degrees. Boy, I tell you that, talking about a job that was unrewarding. They didn't have any technology for that. They just had shovels. And so that's what I would do all day, or cutting down trees and bushes and clearing channels. I mean, these were things I had learned to do very early in my life, to work hard. And the harder I worked, the more likely I was to keep my job and to get paid well and get pay increases. So I realized there was a relationship between the two, but part of it was my parents didn't just simply give me money. I never had an allowance growing up. My parents never gave me an allowance. If I wanted money, you could go out and work for it. And so, those are things that we a lot of times don't want to put our children through, but they're things that are critical and important to them. Because as he goes on in verse 6, he says, blessings crown the head of the righteous, but violence overwhelms the mouth of the wicked. And so in other words, he says, if you want to be blessed, learn how to work hard, be diligent, and avoid laziness, especially if you see it coming. Does that mean you can't relax? No. Sometimes it's hard work to relax, especially if you're used to being a hard worker. But that's part of the equation. That's part of the balance. But I'm out of time. Once again, we'll continue tomorrow as we end up the week. Blessings.